All right, history fans, we made it to World War II. Today we're going to be talking about the road to World War II, some of the main causes and the events throughout the 1930s that led to the outbreak of the war in 1939. So let's get started. All right, so we're going to go from appeasement to war. All right, what happened in the 1930s? So during the 1930s, we have three major dictators across the world who are going to act very aggressively in order to accomplish certain goals for their nation. And the three that we're going to be focusing on today during the war is going to be Adolf Hitler from Germany, Benito Mussolini from Italy, and Emperor Hirohito from Japan. Now, the Western democracies of England, France, to a limited extent, the United States, and so on, are going to try their best to stop the aggression, but ultimately they're going to fail because of their policy of appeasement. We'll talk about that more when we get there. So here's the map. We're going to have two opposing forces. The Axis powers, which is going to be made up of Germany, Italy, and Japan, versus the Allied powers, which is going to be most of the Western powers, China, and so on and so forth, and their colonies. So we're going to see almost the entire globe engulfed in this war, and it's going to be the most destructive war the world has really ever seen. So there's going to be a lot to talk about, so let's keep going. First nation that acted aggressively during this time period is going to be Japan. Now, if you recall, the Meiji Restoration, Japan became a modernized and westernized, and let me just go ahead and remember, modernized, there we go, and westernized nation in the 1860s, and they grew their empire slowly but surely throughout the time between the 1860s and the 1930s. But things really ramped up in 1931 when they invaded Manchuria, which is this region of northeastern China, where the Manchu people come from. Now, a lot of historians will say that this is actually the beginning of World War II, if you want to, call it a world war. But many historians will, identify 1939, September 1st of 1939, as the start of the war. But regardless, Japan is going to violently and aggressively expand their territory throughout Southeast Asia throughout the 1930s and 1940s, mostly to acquire natural resources. As you recall, Japan lacks natural resources as a chain of islands, an archipelago. And also they wanted to grow their empire. It was about prestige for the Japanese and for the glory of empire and imperialism. The League of Nations is going to protest this. However, Japan's basically going to say, peace out. We're not going to be part of the League of Nations anymore. What are you going to do? You're going to try to stop us? Of course, as we know, the League of Nations does nothing to stop them, and Japan, by 1937, will be in control of most of eastern China, which is a big deal. It's a very populous region full of natural resources and human beings. So something to think about. Italy is going to invade Ethiopia. This is something they tried to do in the 1800s, but failed to do. They will be successful in their goal of invading and conquering Ethiopia, which is in northeastern Africa, on the Horn of Africa, in 1935. Again, the League of Nations will place sanctions on Italy, but that doesn't stop Italy, and the League of Nations will not use force against Italy. So again, 0 for 2 for the League of Nations. Next, Hitler starts to break away from the Treaty of Versailles. Now, if you recall, Hitler is going to be a militarist. He's going to increase the size of the German Army, Navy, and Air Force, something that the Treaty of Versailles said they couldn't do. So one thing that Hitler does to really upset the Allies and to break from the Treaty of Versailles is he sends troops into what's known as the Rhineland, which is a region surrounding the Rhine River, which is really important industrial center, and it's also a heavily populated region along the border of Belgium and France. So Belgium, France, and Luxembourg are going to be looking at this, and they're going to start to get nervous based on the aggression Germany is showing. At this point, Western democracies are going to adopt a policy of appeasement. This is a huge vocab term, folks, that comes up on the Regents all the time. And basically, appeasement means giving into the demands of an aggressor in order to keep the peace. So, for instance, if I go into the lunchroom and a bully comes up to me and says, "Give me your milk money or I'll punch you," I'm going to give him my milk money to appease him, right? So that's what a lot of the European democracies are doing in order to appease Hitler. All right, and it's going to bite them in the butt at the end of the day, and we'll see that in a second. Now, appeasement again. Britain and France are completely unwilling to go to war. World War I is still in the memories of most people in these countries, and they do not want to go to war against the Nazis. Many of these countries also saw Hitler as a buffer between the Soviet Union and Western democracies. So, perhaps a necessary evil. That's to be debated, but certainly, a lot of the Western powers didn't foresee how truly evil Hitler and the Nazi regime would become, particularly with the Holocaust and the atrocities in Eastern Europe. The United States also becomes neutral during this conflict. They don't want to get involved. And they signed the Neutrality Acts in the 1930s in order to really fulfill this. However, it's going to be an open secret that the United States will be giving the Allies weapons and aid during this time period. War, unfortunately, can be very good for certain sectors of the economy, particularly sectors that make weapons and bombs and things like that. So in the mid 1930s, we see the Rome, Berlin, Tokyo axis creating the Axis powers. So we're going to continue to call the Axis powers, versus the Allied powers, the two different sides in World War II. So you have Germany, Italy, and Japan, and then the territories that they conquered. So beware of that. The Axis powers versus the Allied powers. Okay. Now, German aggression is going to continue throughout the 1930s and the late 1930s. And Hitler he has this goal of bringing all the German-speaking peoples of Europe together under one Reich, the Third Reich. The first country that he targets to do this is going to be his home country of Austria, which you'll see located just to the south of Germany itself. At first, the leaders of Austria are not really open to just being absorbed by Nazi Germany. However, there is a decent amount of popular support for the Nazis in Austria, being a German-speaking nation. So it becomes very easy for Hitler to march the troops in to Austria and to absorb Austria as part of the German Reich. Now, the Nazis have this idea of Lebensraum, which means living space, which is essentially going to be to grow the size of the German Third Reich in order to have enough living space for the Aryan race. And that if that means there are people there who aren't Aryan, well, we need to get rid of those people. And that's the belief of the Nazis during this time period. It's kind of messed up, and it was certainly something that people, raised more than a few eyebrows in the beginning stages of World War I, or at least the causes of World War I. So again, many Austrians are going to welcome the Nazis, but many are not. But they really do not have a choice. As you can see here, this woman who was forced to do the Nazi salute with tears in her eyes. Really a powerful image showing you the just the magnitude of the situation here. Next, we have the Sudetenland, which is this little ring of land in Czechoslovakia, one of the new countries created during or after World War I. These people are German-speaking people, all right? And Germany, their main goal is to unite all German-speaking peoples under one flag. under the Nazi flag. So what ends up happening is, Germany's going to demand that this territory becomes part of the Third Reich. And England and France, they don't want this to happen, but they also don't want to go to war with Hitler over a relatively small part of the world, the Sudetenland. So they call together this conference called the Munich Conference, which takes place 1 year before the war breaks out in Europe. The Allies, they end up caving to Hitler's demand, and they end up giving him Sudetenland. And Hitler, of course, promises, he says, I'm not going to invade any more land. This is all I want. All right. And you can see this is a modern picture of the Czech Republic. And you can see the darker the red, the more prevalent German-speaking peoples are in this land. So very heavily German. So that's something to think about. All right, and there's another picture that kind of shows you where the Sudetenland is. I know it's pretty blurry, so I apologize about that. Now, the Prime Minister of England at this time is a guy named Neville Chamberlain, and he returns from the Munich conference. He was in that picture shaking hands with Adolf Hitler there, and proclaims peace in our times. Right, we have stopped Hitler. He is done now. Of course, these words are going to come back and bite him, because Hitler will not stop. And political cartoons during this time period show the quote unquote spineless leaders of democracy just letting Hitler prance all over them and walk all over them in order to get what he wants. This is a very critical cartoon on the policy of containment. So it's something to think about. Now, predictably, Hitler invades the rest of Czechoslovakia a couple months after the Munich conference and the Munich Pact is signed. And again, Western democracies, they say, all right, this is it. All right, this is it. We are going to go to war with Hitler if he goes any further. So basically, the country of Poland. All right, that's the next country in line that Hitler has to invade in order to get his Lebensraum, his living space that he talks about all the time. So again, here we go. They finally draw the line. It's Poland. And well, we'll see where that goes in a second here. But another troubling development during this time period is that Hitler and the Soviet Union actually sign a pact, and there's Joseph Stalin, a leader that we've talked about in great detail already. And this shocks the world, because all of a sudden, it seems as though Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union are allies. That's a huge problem. They are two very powerful nations, and all of a sudden they are coming together in this peace agreement, this non-aggression pact. Like, hey, I'm not going to attack you if you don't attack me, buddy. And maybe we'll go in and we can split up Poland because we both hate Poland, right? So they agree on this. And again, even though they hated each other privately, they will sign this pact to essentially help themselves, right? And predictably, by September 1st, 1939, Hitler's going to, and the Nazis will invade Poland. 2 days later, on September 3rd, the war begins, and the world will forever be changed. So that's the war, or not the war, rather, but that's how the war begins. We'll be going into the war itself. And some of the main events and the main developments, the next couple presentations, and then the aftermath of the war and the Holocaust as well. So we got a lot to cover, but we're going to definitely cover it. So if you have any questions, let me know, and I hope everyone has a good day. Signing off.